Hey there, friends. Welcome to Montessori 101, a live show from Child of the Redwoods, all about the magic of Montessori. We believe that every child deserves a Montessori education. I'm Aubrey
And
Hargis.
I'm David Hargis. So whether you're joining us live, hello out there. We see you out there. Maybe you're just watching the replay, which is great. Or maybe you're listening to this as a podcast. Doesn't matter. We're just happy that you are with us. If you are new to Child of the Redwoods and you'd like to know more about our work, head over to our website, childoftheredwoods.com.
Yes. So today we are talking about nonfiction books. This is, I don't know anybody who would say nonfiction books is exactly controversial. It's really fiction books that's controversial in Montessori. We'll get into that a little bit later. But we really want to share our love of the nonfiction book experience as it pertains to your at-home library as a Montessori parent. We're talking about actual print books, and nonfiction books are actually one of our 21 Montessori essentials. So we're back into our essentials series. And if you don't have a copy of the 21 Montessori essentials, you can go to childoftheredwoods.com/essentials. Get yourself a copy of that list.
Okay. Well, let's jump into it.
Okay. So books. We all love books.
Yeah, we love all kinds of books.
I mean, most of us love books. David and I actually really, really love books. A little little sneak peek. We both come from a heavy literature background ourselves, not just an education teaching background, but actually that is really where our love for education began. It began through our love of literature.
Yeah, for sure. I have lots of fond memories of reading. And I was a voracious early reader, a passion that stayed with me for my whole life. I have a master's in literature. I wanted to, at one point, I was really interested in becoming a scholar of literature, literary scholar, because I really loved working with books and the ideas. And eventually I decided to give my more practical application with education and the work we're doing today. But that love is deep. And when we met in college, it was around English. You weren't an English major per se,
yes,
but you were definitely a focus on reading and literature and linguistics.
Yeah, well, when we met, I wasn't yet in graduate school. So I was still working on my elementary education degree, my bachelor's. And so I was in that between period, like where I was not quite student teaching. And then when I started working there, and then while I was still working at the Writing Center at the university, then I started my student teaching experience. And then you also had a student teaching experience.
Yeah.
Did you also work at the Writing Center?
Well, that's where we met.
Teaching? I think so.
We were writing tutors at the university.
But I mean, like, did you do your student teaching while you were also working at the Writing Center?
Yes, because that's how I made money to eat.
Yes, and
it was called dinner.
We made what, $5 an hour at first?
Well, it was more than you made student teaching because you made $0 as a teaching intern. It's an unpaid internship.
It was wonderful. So, David's, I don't know, I think that we both kind of had different interests within English. I have always kind of gravitated more towards poetry and kind of romantic fiction, not necessarily like heavy romance, but like very dramatic, romantic, old-fashioned type of literature. And
I'm a big sci-fi nerd. I read so many sci-fi
and
novels.
Fantasy was my thing as well.
And I don't really care for fantasy.
Right.
I love sci-fi. I know, and it's a distinction. Like, how can you love sci-fi? But I do. I don't.
Yeah.
If it's about a wizard, I'm not interested. If it's about some kind of future wizard-like technology, then it's amazing. So
we do actually have something in common that nurtured that love of reading. And that is that both of our parents intentionally cultivated that love when we were very, very young. I know that your mother was actually your fourth grade teacher, and then she became the school librarian.
The district librarian.
That's right. Yeah.
And
my mother, of course, was a Montessori teacher. And, just in our house, like we had lots and lots of books, lots of, our parents both modeled reading for us. And I know that your mom reads voraciously. Did your dad also read?
Yeah, not as much. No. My sister, though, definitely a heavy heavy duty reader. She's an
Yeah.
English teacher, a high school or middle school, public middle school in Texas.
Yeah.
And my mother still works part-time, even though she's retired. She still does part-time work for the district. I grew up in a really little community. And so there's not a lot of librarians. So she still works part-time for that school.
And because she loves
And
it.
she loves it. She does. So what is all
She
this
does.
about? The point is that we love books. So we want to talk about nonfiction books, but we don't want to um, exclude other kinds of books. We just want to give a little special love to nonfiction specifically.
Yeah.
And why is that? Why is it that we wanted to highlight nonfiction? Well, it's because I think, and we were talking about this in society, kind of more generally. If you go to a library or you go to a school, you just general dialogue in society. When people talk about books, they usually are talking about fiction. Now, again, we love books. We love all kinds of books, but there is kind of a bias against nonfiction in a way. It's considered dry, I think, or
Mhm.
academic or boring. And
Yeah,
sort of
we just both said that both of our backgrounds, we fell in love with books because of fiction.
totally. That's right. And so, but I mean, that's because it's so accessible. So, and when you do see nonfiction books I think they tend to be used as teaching aids.
Mhm.
So we're going to we're going to reference something and now we'll just do it online. And so now we've kind of equated, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. The
Mhm.
internet sort of has replaced nonfiction books. And that's just not the case, especially in Montessori, where nonfiction books play a very prominent role.
Mhm.
Now, the reason for it is kind of a twofer. One is all reading is beneficial. It's just a literally rich environment is great for kids. And so the more books that you can have, the better. And if they get hooked on reading about a scientific thing or a historical thing or an artwork or whatever nonfiction piece they're reading, is great because they're practicing their reading skills. The other, though, is
I
that
would say language
language
skills.
skills.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
fair.
it could be because at first they're
That's
listening
true.
to it, and
That's
so
right.
they're developing their auditory skills.
Yep, absolutely right. So they're language
It leads
skills.
to reading,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
usually.
Oh, that makes sense. The other, though, is that kids, especially, I think it's probably, you correct me here, but I think in that 5 to 10 age range, they get really fixated on what is real and what is not real, trying to discern. I mean, it starts earlier, but and they become very, very interested, especially as they get into that second plane with things that are from the natural world. The mania is about dinosaurs or cars or airplanes or space travel. And so having nonfiction books helps satisfy that curiosity for how the natural world works, which I think comes directly from their desire to know what is real and what is not real.
I would say it starts even earlier than age 5.
Okay. Yeah.
Generally, in Montessori, we really focus on that distinction between learning what is truth, what is real, what is fact
Hmm.
versus what is fiction, what is fantasy
That's true.
or
Yeah.
imagination based. And we do that starting really around like the transition when your child is able to start acquiring that type of knowledge is usually around 2.5
That's a good point.
to 3.5, like at the very beginning age.
Yeah, that's
And
right. Because you have like real and non-real, or
prior
sorry,
to that, your child just takes
living
it
and
at face
non-living.
value. Like your
Yeah.
2-year-old will just look at something and say, okay, well, if I can see it, it's real. And a 3-year-old may look at it and say, I see that it's a dragon, but I know dragons aren't real because mommy told me so.
Right.
But they won't really know what that means.
That's a good
So
point.
you're correct in
That's
saying
right.
like around 5 to 10, they really start making that distinction
Because
for
there's something in the brain
themselves.
that's starting to change and they have that capacity for
Yeah,
abstract
but it's not a
thinking.
switch, right?
No, of
It's a
course not.
slow build up.
Yeah. So, we want to feed that. That's one of those sensitivities, right?
Mhm.
As we talk about sensitive periods, or that's one of those essential Montessori concepts. Nonfiction is a thing that allows us to meet to that readiness, that period of readiness, that sensitivity to exploring what is real, what is not real. And in the second plane, I think that then leads to, well, what do I believe about the world? And the process that kids go through where they sort of idealize certain things and then decide good and evil and right and wrong, those sort of moral questions, which really stem from the thinking of like what is real and what is not real, which kind of stem from earlier lessons like like there's an early lesson in physical science about or life science about living and non-living, right? That you
Mhm.
use for the very, very little ones.
That's right.
And that's an an earlier example of how you're starting to get kids to think and classify. And as they get older, they start to want to classify much more complex things.
Right.
So nonfiction is really important in helping that journey.
It is. So let's actually get into some nonfiction books. We're going to hold up some examples, and I will I will tell you, friends, I kind of did this on purpose. I waited until the very last minute, like 2 minutes before we were going to go live, and then I just nabbed some examples.
So
for
you're not
us. And
totally
so
sure what's in here.
I don't even know what's in that stack. I just like grab, and I'm pretty sure there's a variety of ages. So let's just see what we got, and let's talk about what these nonfiction books can do for families.
Okay, so here's our first one.
Okay, our first book is an alphabet book.
Yeah,
right?
ABC
So,
alphabet book.
My mother, if she's watching, you will recognize this book. It's one of the ones that I have kept for a long time, but you probably won't see it in print today, just friends, just so you know. I know when I show books, people often go looking for them online. This one I'm pretty sure is out of print, and there's a mistake in it as far as Montessori goes. So that's also something to be good to know about. All right, and this one is dedicated to me with love on my first birthday. So an example of a book for a very young toddler. What's inside this book? All right, so this book is really, really simple. There's a picture of an object, a doll, and then we're emphasizing the letter, and so it's just the word doll, and then there's a little information about dolls. It says dolls can be either boys or girls, and I guess these days we would add or non-binary folk, whatever.
Yeah.
But they're not real people. No one has ever seen a doll grow up. Right? So I give this book kudos for making the distinction between reality
Exactly.
and fantasy right here in the language. And so as a Montessorian, I look at this book and I'm like, yes, that's what I want.
That's right.
And it's not, it's a very old book, so it's not a great photograph of a doll, but it definitely looks like a doll to me. So
Well, sure.
the child can see it. And what would a baby be learning from this?
A very little baby, sure. Yeah,
a very little baby is just looking at the picture. A young toddler would maybe go and get their own doll, to like have, here's my doll and here's a picture of a doll, So I think that this is lovely just for the example that little toddlers need pictures of real things to look at.
Mm-hmm.
If there was a toddler in our house right now, we would say, this is a guitar. Guitar. And then they might go run and find your guitar, which is hanging up on the wall.
So a question, since we're thinking through this, an alphabet book is a great example of nonfiction for a little one. But what if the examples in it were a fantasy things? What if the D was not for doll, but for a dragon?
Well, that's where we have to use our evaluation skills as Montessorians, right? So it kind of depends on your point of view. If I personally have no problem with a picture of a dragon, because that is something that does exist. It exists in our imaginations, so it is a real thing, but it's an imaginary thing. And so I don't have a problem sharing that D is for dragon. But if it was like a cartoony looking dragon that looked totally unreal, and then on the next page was like a cartoony dog that looks, big bug eyes and looks totally unreal, then I would be looking at it kind of critically, thinking like, can my child look at this picture of a dog and then know that it's a dog? Is it too cartoony? So that's kind of what I'd be. And if I had two books, if I had a book of real objects and a book of cartoony objects or pictures, I'd pick the one that's real.
Yeah, we always, and in fact, when we put together Constellation, our monthly thematic curriculum, we really try to emphasize real pictures for that reason. As other Montessorians will as well.
Yes.
All right,
okay, let's see another
one from the back.
toddler book.
Okay. Baby goes to market.
Baby
It's
Goes
a
to
board book of some
Market.
kind.
This is by Atanuke, and this one is not out of print. It's a really popular book right now, and it's really, really sweet. So let's just look at the cover. On the cover, I see a picture of a parent and child. Looks like a little toddler, right? And then we look inside, and there is realistic action happening here. So on the first page, it just says, Baby loves bananas. Baby loves bananas so much that the lady selling bananas gives baby 6 bright bananas. Baby is so surprised. Baby eats 1 banana. All right. Everything in this book is something that could happen in real life.
So, right. So the thing
Right.
that's important here is that this is nonfiction because it's depicting reality, not because it's like a biographical snapshot of this particular baby going to the market and eating a banana.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think that's important because I think when we think of nonfiction, especially when it's about the life of something, I think sometimes or let's say in this case where it's illustrated, we might say, well, it's fiction because it's illustrated and it's not an actual real life baby that did these things, but it's depicting reality.
It is. Yeah.
And-
So, it actually is a fiction story. We don't know if this actually happened or not. It could, but it could happen to a child and a parent.
And so for the age group, this toddler, this is the type of nonfiction you might be looking at.
It is. It's a great nonfiction book to add to your library. Yeah.
I'm learning to. She picked the books and I don't know what's in there. I haven't read all these books. No,
Let's have one for primary.
Okay. Well, I don't know if this is what you would have picked, but I love Chickens Aren't the Only Ones.
Okay.
By Ruth Heller.
Yes. Anything by Ruth Heller is awesome. Let's take a look inside. Okay. Let's see.
I love the illustrations. They're wonderful.
Okay.
I think you could still get these books too.
All right. Let me just kind of see if I can just flip. Okay.
And look at this.
Okay. So here is an example of the kind of colorful imagery that you see inside this book. And it's got very few words on each page. Every bird, wild or tame, does the same. And there's just different pictures of very realistic looking birds that you could talk about with your child. Okay. The ostrich lays the largest egg. And then you can look, and we don't know exactly what eggs these birds came from or laid them, but we do know that they are very realistic looking eggs. And
and it's showing these various sizes, which is the key.
And Ruth Heller is an author who does a lot of great nonfiction books about topics that we might not otherwise think to share with our children. So Chickens Aren't the Only Ones. It's about the
eggs.
It's about
all the things that
animals
use eggs
that
to
lay
procreate.
eggs, and the name for that is oviparous. And she uses that word in the back. Chickens aren't the only ones. There's no more to discuss. Everyone who lays an egg is oviparous. And so that is another Montessori critical perspective is
Totally.
Does the book offer rich vocabulary for a child? And that one definitely does.
Want to do one or two more here? Which ones? Do you want to do something a little older?
Let's have this one here.
Awesome. That's a good one.
Okay, yeah. So this one is from Lava to Life. The Universe Tells Our Earth Story. It is an elementary. It's really written for Montessori elementary kids. I mean, any child can read it, obviously. But it is a Montessori great lesson story. So it's called From Lava to Life. The Universe Tells Our Earth Story. And the cool thing about Jennifer Morgan's books is that she is able to kind of personify a nonfiction concept, and so the objects in her books are the animals or the earth. In this case, I think it's the earth. The universe is actually the main character of the story and is like telling the story. And that would be a concept that elementary children would definitely respond to. So, for example, Earth was one of my most imaginative young planets. Her dreams were packed with worms and wolves, daffodils and dinos, raccoons and baboons, peach trees and palm trees, caves and castles. Would Earth become all those things in her dreams? So, like, Earth is like a person, dreaming. Earth has thoughts and feelings, that's something that a primary child would just
It's
would
not
go
going to
over their
happen.
head. It's
Yeah.
not going to really
The other
sink
thing I
in.
liked about that page that you were showing
Mm.
is I'm thinking about for an older ones, especially
Mhm.
because when you get into that lower elementary, it's a lot of it is about independent research.
Yeah.
And this is a beautiful picture, but it's completely fantastical, right?
Mhm.
You
Yep.
have dinosaurs, you have
Mhm.
deciduous trees, you have
Yep.
mammals, things that didn't exist together. There were no mammals and deciduous trees and dinosaurs together. But
This tree also looks vaguely
like it's walking
like
like
it's
some
walking.
sort
Yeah.
of Lord of the Rings tree. That's right.
Yes.
But for an older child,
And
it
there's
can.
lips on these flowers.
That's right.
I know, which is perfectly elementary.
Totally.
And it's also a nonfiction book.
Exactly. And that's the
Right.
point to make is that I think we sometimes, when we think nonfiction, I think we can think dry because this goes back to the opening piece. Like, why do we want to call out nonfiction? It doesn't get it to do. Nonfiction is really fun. It can be imaginative. It can have a narrative. It can personify things, but it's reflective of reality. And in that sense, it is different than fiction.
That's right.
All right. Well,
okay. All right. So lovely. 3 or
a
4,
bunch of
maybe
books.
4.
And we have a whole
great
bunch more
examples.
here, and there's too many to go through, which
I'm
is
glad you
kind of
just picked some. Yeah.
the point.
It
There's
is.
so many great books in the world. In fact, one of the things we get asked a lot is what book should I be using, whether it's nonfiction or fiction, for my child who's X age, or my children who are this age and this age, or who are interested in this topic. And frankly, can be overwhelming. There are just so many print resources available, or even digital, but we would prefer print in this case. So how do you figure that out? Well, we would suggest one of the ways to do it is being part of a community or a program that's going to help you discern through that. So there's some really great YouTubers out there. There's some great blogs and lists, communities that you could join on social media that can help you kind of parse through that. But like we talked about in our last episode on homeschooling foundations, you've got to start with a perspective. What is your approach to education going to be? Your mindset, your intention, and when you set that for us, of course, it's Montessori. Then it's going to become a framework. So you're going to say, what are books that are Montessori aligned, like we were talking about with that ABC book, that are fitting. And then you're going to want to go find resources that align from there. So, for example, that's one of the things that we do. We always publish every month lists of books in our Constellation curriculum.
That's right.
These are a set of books, nonfiction and fiction. These are probably mostly nonfiction, actually. This is for the dive theme we did. We also have for every subject area, we have in both our primary and our lower L foundations courses, we have lists of books that would be useful to teach those concepts. And then in our community, there's lots of people talking and sharing ideas. So the point is that, if you go back and watch, or if you didn't yet, watch last week's episode about the foundations. And we really emphasize that come up with your point of view, like what is it that you believe about teaching and what is it that you want to emulate, and then use that as a metric to help you find the quality resources that you want, wherever you've turned to those resources, and there's lots of them available. But that really will help you weed through the overwhelming amount of information.
For sure.
And on that note, speaking of overwhelming amount of information, in the modern world, there's even more because of the internet. So I think one of the questions I hear is, and I've heard for a long time, is can't Wikipedia replace nonfiction books? Can't you get all this information online? And the answer is no and yes, right? Yes, you can find answers quickly online, but online resources do not replace books. We read differently online than we do than with a paper object or a physical object. The brain processes it differently. When we don't have baskets of books sitting around our house, it limits the child's ability to go grab them. We know for sure what content is in that book. There's not going to be ads or things popping up. So there's a quality control, a message control, a vision control that's happening there as well. And it's just a lot more fun. So, we're kind of tempted, I think, nowadays to get the tablet and put it in the kids' hands on a long road trip. but books actually can be just as amazing, in fact, more amazing, as they have been for centuries. Like as long as we've had printed books and people have been able to carry them around and read them, we've been intrigued by them, and that's no less true today. So, does the internet replace print books and nonfiction, particularly? No way.
Of course not. Yeah. It is very, very tempting to.
Super tempting.
I know. But it's just so important. I think the real pictures, just having that tactile hands-on experience.
I mean, we didn't get to it, but a book like these DK books are just incredible. And even as an adult, who's studied this, and it's still just fascinating. I love pulling these out. You find them, sitting around every now and again, and I'll just want to look at them. Those books on like timelines of history and so forth, they appeal to everybody in a way that an online resource just doesn't have the same. There's just something about opening up that big book and seeing all those pictures and images throughout the history of human life laid out, or of the planets in our solar system or whatever, that is so captivating. And you can't replace it.
That's true. All right, let's talk about fantasy a little bit.
Yes, this is the debate, right?
It is. So Montessorians kind of have, I don't know. I guess I don't know that I would say a love-hate relationship. I think I would say I feel uncomfortable relationship with fantasy fiction books. So what makes a book fantasy as opposed to fiction? Because we just talked about, there is nonfiction that is kind of woven with a little bit of fiction in there, right? Like this one.
Mm-hmm.
And there are books that are realistic fiction, like this book Baby Goes to Market, where we talked about how it's nonfiction. Is it fiction? Is it not? I have even a hard time, deciding.
Well, it's isn't that part of the point? Is it like
Yes.
it's a false distinction?
Yes.
That Dewey Decimal System strikes again,
right.
or something?
So if you were to pick up a book and it was just like, and then the dog hopped on top of the dragon and flew away, like, that's fiction, right?
That's
if
right.
There's like unicorns in there, or there's dragons, or there's unrealistic things, or even if there's like animals that are talking
That's
and
right.
interacting in ways that aren't the ways you would see, like a bear flying a plane.
That's
or that sort of thing. Montessorians get really kind of creeped out at that kind of book, because I think that Maria Montessori herself really believed that we should be giving children the opportunity to focus on those real life things.
That's right.
That they are interested, because it's there. She says there's no need to like introduce these kind of fantastical things, because real life is so freaking fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, kids get super involved.
Why would you bother putting a bear into an airplane? We could just put a human into an airplane, and it's so much even more interesting to the child, maybe because they could see themselves as like that person inside. But you put a bear in there, and the child's like, oh, fun, the bear is in the airplane.
I love those Richard
Richard
Scarry books, the Little Tiny Town with the worms and stuff. Those are delightful, but
they're delightful. But Maria Montessori's point is, and I just think it's such a very valid point. It's not like that those books are horrible and we need to burn them. And there are Montessorians who really feel that way for the under 6 age group, kind of feel like, and you might see that online. You go online, you'll be like, oh, Montessorians hate fiction, like they hate fiction. You'll get that feel.
Fantasy,
at least fantasy fiction. And I would say, I have known so many Montessori teachers who will put like the best of realistic fiction or slight nonfiction into their libraries, and then they will like go to Comic-Con on the weekends, dress up and have paint unicorns and put them around their house. I mean, I know Montessorians who do that. So it's not that we Montessorians don't like fantasy stuff. I was a big fantasy nerd in my teenage years, especially, and really it started when I was in elementary. But also that is kind of also the point, is that like that is the age elementary and beyond, where fantasy becomes the most appealing. And so it feels ironic that we have all of these fiction books available to children. If you go into any library, maybe your children's library is set up differently, but the ones that I have been in, almost all of them have a very robust fiction story time setup where like you'll go in and there's like kind of comfy cushions or chairs or little tiny toddler tables, and just all around are all of like the fiction story books, and there'll be a mix of like fantasy fiction and realistic fiction in there, but that's what will be presented as being available. And then the nonfiction books, like these planets, books, or parakeets, those sorts of things, those are all going to be like aside in some kind of nonfiction section away from the story time era. And so as a Montessorian, we would say that that might be reversed, that we would, if a Montessorian were to set up a children's library, we would probably like heavily douse it with nonfiction choices.
Totally.
And then also have in a good mix of realistic fiction. And then the fantasy fiction, I think that we would really heavily curate. We would say, hey, is it such a great story that it's worthy of being out here, with all this other real stuff? Or is it just like, just kind of like not great writing, obviously was produced super quickly, not high quality, then we might put those, like in the back section.
But so, the bottom line is that you would distinguish not between nonfiction or historical fiction or fiction itself, but just the quality.
That's my preference, and that's what we did is we just really, as in our household, we went with the more is better approach, and we just tried to fill our house with as much as possible. But some books did come in that we didn't really resonate with. Sometimes they were given to us, and I just felt like they weren't really bringing a lot to our child's experiences. And so those just got thrifted in the other states. So we definitely did a lot of curating in our home library, even though we erred on the side of like a wide variety of different kinds of genres in our house.
And we need to wrap here in a minute, but I think piggybacking on this concept of quality and purpose and so forth, I think in the modern world, the challenge that a lot of us face as parents is branded books and materials, IP branded, Marvel stuff, Star Wars, Pixar, whatever, Disney, things that are branded that are aimed at very, very little kids. And they're almost entirely fantasy, but they're not just fantasy. There's a question about consumerism. And is this a book that's meant to sort of teach a lesson or introduce ideas, or is this a commercial in the form of paper?
Yes.
And I think that is a different dimension that, it's not brand new. It's been, our generation certainly dealt with it. They talk about Star Wars as sort of the beginning of that in the 70s and the branding that went with it. But children's programming predated that. But you have to go back in time, it wasn't the same, right? You go back to the early 20th century, there are children's books, but they're not these IP things and, intellectual property monsters or whatever. There were books that were written as books.
I am not a historical children's literature expert, so I would have to do research on that. But I can say that there are a whole lot of books about Dora the Explorer, or I don't know, Paw Patrol or Barbie or like any of those. Anytime you have like children's toys that are related from a cartoon, you're going to find lots and lots of books written about that kind of stuff too. And that is the kind of thing we would be also super cautious of as Montessorians.
Right. In part because this gets into the question about constructed play versus open play, right? If you start to read the book and you have the toy and it's all sort of licensed and branded together, and you have the other media, how is that changing the child's sense of play, and how does that blur the sense of real and not real? right? Because if you have a book and now you can see it acted out with all these special effects, and you can go buy the stuff that lets you actually have the lightsaber or the toys or whatever that mimic it, it can become more confusing in a way. And so I think that the commercialism aspect is something that adds a new wrinkle to this fantasy versus non-fantasy, fiction versus nonfiction debate.
It does. Yep. And I wish we could I wish we could do a whole we can maybe we'll do a whole episode on that one too sometime.
That's right.
But enjoy your nonfiction books, friends. They are wonderful. Try and aim for a huge variety of them so that your child just gets exposed to all the vocabulary and
Totally.
the beautiful pictures that often come in nonfiction books.
Don't let yourself get overwhelmed by the number of choices. You know, go back and watch the episode we did last week about how to set up, a foundation, creating a foundation for your homeschooling experience, whether you're full-time homeschooling or not. It's a great way to sort of think about learning in your home, and it'll give you some guidelines that you can apply to helping navigate through the, sea of books that are available to you and your family.
All right, let's wrap it up here. Thank you so much for joining us today. If the Montessori method is calling to you, head on over to our website, childoftheredwoods.com. You'll find some free resources there. We've got free resources at childoftheredwoods.com/free. And you can go download some parts cards and other
That's
fun
right.
things too.
Yeah, if you're interested in our other work, like our programs that provide those reading lists, you can find that information on our store. If you have feedback and questions, you can email us at hello@childoftheredwoods, or you can leave a comment here, or you could reach us on Instagram. There's a bunch of different ways. So we just love hearing from you. We love all your comments. We really appreciate that. Just head over to our website, childoftheredwoods.com, and you can reach out.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Take care.